Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, What You Need to Know About Form 5500 and ERISA Requirements. This is hosted by MedCom Benefit Solutions. My name is Casey Hope. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications here at MedCom, and I'm very excited to bring you this webinar today. So thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to join us. A couple of little housekeeping things before we get started. There will be a Q&A session at the very end of the webinar. So if you have questions as we're going through the material, please go ahead and feel free to type that into the questions panel, and we'll address that at the end of the webinar. Another thing we wanted to tell you is that this webinar is being recorded, and we are able to provide you with that recording and the slide deck after the webinar concludes today. So that will either come out via email this afternoon or tomorrow morning. So just again, this is being recorded. You will be able to get a copy of that information at the end of the presentation. So today our webinar is presented by Candace Jones, our Senior Compliance Analyst, and Mary Catherine Waldron, our Director of Health and Welfare Compliance. We're so excited to have them with us today and excited to cover some different material than we normally do on our Thursday webinars. So Candace and Mary Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. And Mary Catherine, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Casey, and good afternoon, everyone. As Casey said, I'm Mary Catherine Waldron, Director of the Health and Welfare Compliance Department here at MedCom, and I'm so pleased to be with all of you today and to discuss what I think is one of our more important compliance services that we provide, 5500's. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get to the information. So, what is a 5500? Well, it's required under ERISA for reporting disclosure rules. It's really an important compliance and research disclosure tool for the Department of Labor. On this document, it helps plan beneficiaries, plan participants and beneficiaries, and really is used as a source of information for some federal agencies, Congress, and the private sector in assessing employee benefits, taxes, economic trends, and even policies. So it really is an important form that we put together. Some quick backstory on it. Filings were first required in 1988. And you may have noticed that in 2009 they started going electronic, which is why when you go to research filings for your clients, you can't see anything from 2008 and back. So and further, filings are submitted annually through the Employee Benefits Security Administration, and there's two types of plans. There are retirement plans, your 401ks. You'll recognize them while researching because they typically start with 001 plan number. And then there are the health and welfare plans that MedCom assists with, and you'll recognize those because those will start with a plan number from 501 and up. And of course, all of these filings are submitted electronically through the eFast portal, and of course we use that for our researching purposes. So what information is actually included on the filing? Why are they so important? Well, as we stated earlier, it is a research and disclosure tool for the Department of Labor. And how does that work? Well, on it will be listed information about the employer's address and phone number, some key contacts for the plan. So that's where that plan signer comes in. Who is representing the plan sponsor in certifying the information reported on the filing, and who are broker and consultants that worked on the plan, and that's why commissions and fees are reported. How about total number of employees at the beginning of and end of the plan year? That gives us a good idea of how many are actually participating and what's the story in terms of general participation rates on certain types of lines of coverage, and really what are the lines of coverage offered by this employer, and who are the carriers and TPAs and other service providers that are providing these lines of coverage. And we go further. What are the premiums paid to insurers? What were the renewal dates? How about number of COBRA constituents? And then, of course, the different funding and benefit arrangements. So a lot of times you'll see, especially if you're working with us on a filing, we really drill home, is this a self-funded or fully insured line of coverage? Is it offered through a trust or a collective bargaining agreement? Are all of the lines of coverage, or maybe one or two, offered through a MIWA? That's really important. That impacts the type of filing that we provide. And so when looking at a 5500, there's two main questions we have to ask ourselves. What is the plan subject to ERISA? I mean, that's number one right there. And then two, is the small plan exception available? So what plans are generally subject to ERISA? You'll have your group health and medical coverages, and generally dental plans, vision plans, life insurance, HRAs, FSAs, your disability plans in certain circumstances, prepaid legal plans, telemedicine. And you'll notice that we have asterisks there for wellness and EAPs. Wellness and EAP will be deemed subject to ERISA in the event that they offer medical care. And medical care is generally determined by whether or not counseling sessions are provided. If you have if you have an EAP plan that is strictly referral, it's possible that that would not be deemed subject to ERISA. If you have a wellness plan that doesn't offer biometric screenings, it's possible that would not be subject to ERISA. These are lines of coverage that we have to take on a case-by-case basis and take a look at what really the setup of the plan is and go from there. So we also have plans that are not subject to ERISA. These will be your governmental plans, church plans, plans maintained outside of the U.S. for non-U.S. resident alien employees, HSAs, the health savings accounts, those are not subject to ERISA. Your POP plans. Now, don't be confused by that because a lot of times we'll say, well, my medical, dental, and vision are all in the POP. Does that mean that these aren't included? No, it's really based on the Section 125 plan itself would not have to be filed as a 5500. Looking at your Section 125 dependent care plan, that's not subject to ERISA. And then, of course, voluntary benefits. This is one that tends to come up a lot. Are my voluntary benefits subject to ERISA? Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Certainly, one of the key ways that we can determine that easily is if any of your voluntary lines of coverage are offered through your cafeteria plan, they're offered on a pre-tax basis, we can umbrella them into being subject to ERISA. If any of these lines of coverage are employer endorsed, we should proceed with deeming them subject to ERISA. But we can go further into a voluntary benefit exception on a case-by-case basis when evaluating 5500 lines of coverage that are subject to being filed on a 5500, whether or not they're subject to ERISA. But these are things to keep in mind, the voluntary benefit exception. And a few slides ago, I mentioned a small plan exemption. Well, what does that necessarily imply? Well, that's about when a plan has fewer than 100 participants as of the first day of the plan year. And that's really the key. Whenever we're talking about has the threshold requiring or compelling a filing, when has that been crossed? The first day of the plan year. That's what matters. So if they have 100, or if they have 99 or less employees as of the first day of the plan year, a filing would not be required for that year. Further, our participants, are they enrolled employees, not counting spouses and dependents? And we want to be absolutely sure that when we're looking at participant counts, we're counting employees only for determining whether or not a filing is compelled. And then also the exemption generally applies to single employer plans without trust funding requirements. So single employer plans, we're thinking of those that are not MIWAs, right? And anything that would be a controlled group would be considered a single employer plan, not an affiliated service group, but rather a controlled group or quite literally a single employer. Okay, so one of the aspects that we tend to come across is really in talking about 5500s, we're talking about subjectivity to ERISA. And really where that starts is taking a look at the lines of coverage offered and making sure that they're documented properly. And I know that it's part of our practice. Whenever looking at a 5500 for a group, we always say, do you have a wrap document on file? And it's so important to have a wrap document when you have ERISA lines of coverage. Certainly, there are regulatory, there's regulatory information, fiduciary information. All of that needs to be provided and is required to be provided in an SPD by the DOL to employee participants when there are ERISA benefits offered. Now, one of the benefits of having a wrap document is that you can file consolidated plans, singular 5500s for all of your coverages. But what if you have a client who offers ERISA benefits but does not have an executed wrap document on record? Well, in this case, you would have unwrapped plans, and each unwrapped benefit would be deemed a separate ERISA welfare plan. Each one would have their own plan name, their own plan number, their own plan effective date, and all of this information would be reflected on the 5500. And each line of coverage would require a Schedule A that would be attached to the 5500. And there is one saving grace there, where if you have unwrapped benefits, they could be grouped together by policy number. So let's take the example we have here. You have dental and vision coverage by the same carrier with an identical base policy number. Well, those can be grouped together. So you could have a singular Schedule A for your dental and vision, because as you can see here, they're from the same policy. But generally, when looking at unwrapped plan benefits, you'd have to actually file each one separately. And looking forward, if we can go to the next slide. Here on the left, you'll see in the unwrapped benefits, you'll have medical, dental, vision, life, and ADD. We see all of them listed with their own plan number. This would be 4 separate filings you would have to do for a client without a wrap document. That can be costly for your client. Even when they're timely, that's costly in terms of paying for preparation. But let's say there's a scenario in which filings have actually been late, they're not filed timely. Having to put 4 delinquent filings together, which Candace will discuss in further detail later, could be quite costly. Whereas if you have a wrap document in place, the document will quite literally wrap itself around all of the benefits offered subject to ERISA, assign them a singular ERISA plan number, a singular plan name, and they can all be filed in a consolidated 5500 and really limit the need to make multiple reports to the DOL. It helps you with research purposes, and it helps bring everything together. Now, what about wrap documents when you have the small plan exception? Well, a wrap plan will still affect filing requirements for the small plan exception. If the composite participant count for a wrap plan is 100 or more, all wrapped benefits must be filed. What does that mean? So here we have an unwrapped benefit where you have medical, dental, vision, life. So on the left-hand side, medical and life and ADD, those are the only two that actually cross the participant threshold. And so really, in a scenario in which you don't have a wrap document, you'd only have to file medical and life. Okay. With a wrap document, what we would take a look at is each line of coverage and which line of coverage exceeded 100, if any. Well, here we see life and ADD not only exceeded 100, but it had 130. And that would trigger us to think, okay, this group has to file. But because it is a wrapped filing, a wrapped plan, each line of coverage, regardless of how many participants were on each line, all coverages will be included on the report. So it's really important to make sure that when you're looking at whether or not if you have a wrapped plan, whether or not they're subject to ERISA, it's any one line of coverage in a wrapped plan that exceeds 100 participants, all lines of coverage file. They don't aggregate, but they trigger each other. And so the next subject would be, what about if you have a self-funded medical, dental, vision, any one of these plans? There does tend to be some traditional confusion about whether or not they are subject to filing or exempt from filing. Self-funded lines are not exempt from reporting. They're merely exempt from providing a schedule, and typically it would be a Schedule A or Schedule C. But we still have to report that the line of coverage is there. This is typically your medical, dental, or vision. It also could include your FSA or your HRA. These are all lines of coverage that would be reported with a welfare code and indicating that the funding source would be the general assets of the plan sponsor. So if you have a group that offers self-funded coverage, please make sure to still make that clear to us, because we want to make sure that it is reported. And so here's probably the most important aspect of all of this. When is the filing submitted? So the due date of any ERISA plan year, the due date is based on the ERISA plan year or the filing year. So for plans that are not wrapped, the filing year would be the policy year or the coverage period of a particular line of coverage. It could also go with the employer's fiscal year. That's permissible. But a wrapped benefit or a wrap plan, a consolidated filing, must be filed based on the ERISA plan year as defined in the wrap document. And when exactly is the filing submitted? So filings are always due 7 months after the end of the plan year or coverage period for the group. So here we're going to take a look at, we'll assume that this is a wrapped plan and they operate on a calendar year. They run 1/1 to 12/31, in this case for the 2020 plan year. So for a 12-month full plan year, their filing will be due by July 31st, 2021, 7 months after the plan year ended. Now, let's say we get into a scenario in which, for whatever reason, filing by 7/31 is not going to be possible. The DOL understands that things like this happen and extensions are available. They're a Form 5558, and it provides an automatic 2.5-month extension to the filing. Now, it's really important that that 5558 be filed by the original due date. So for a calendar year plan for 2020, we're approaching the 7/31 due date. There's whatever reason it's not going to be filed timely, a carrier is failing to furnish a schedule we require, the plan signer is out on vacation, whatever the story is, we need to file an extension. The extension needs to be filed by 7/31/2021 in order to be effective. Now there's two other ways in which an extension could occur. Perhaps there's been an extension to the corporate tax filing. And then there's also special extensions granted by the IRS or the DOL. This could be a natural disaster. Certainly, such extensions are done in press releases from the IRS. I remember a few years ago there was a hurricane in the southeast United States, and so there were certain extensions applied to states in that area. And so if there were any applicable special extensions, we'd be aware of those, and we would be able to provide such guidance to you if it pertained to your particular client. But generally, the Form 5558 extensions are the most common extension available. So you have a calendar year plan. It runs 1/1 to 12/31. Your regular due date is 7/31. For whatever reason, we need to extend it. You can submit the extension by 7/31. You get an automatic 2.5 months. It's now due by October 15th, 2021. Now, here's the really important key about that. Once a filing has been extended, it cannot be extended a second time. The extension is a one-time opportunity, and the filing must be completed by that extended due date. If a filing misses its extended due date, it would be deemed a late filing, and the time frame that gets applied to it in terms of the days late revert back to the original due date. So for this particular scenario, you have a calendar year 2020 plan. It was due 7/31 and we extended it to 10/15. On October 16th, the filing was not filed timely. The late fee would be assessed back to July 31st. So that's a really important aspect. So just to make things fun, what if we also have a short plan year involved? So we have, for the 2020 plan year, a short plan year of March 1st through September 30th. Well, the filing would still be due 7 months after the end of that short plan year. That doesn't change. So here, from 9/30, when the plan ended about 6 months early, we would have to have the filing in by April 30th, 2021. You then have a plan year that was running 10/1/20 through 9/30/21. Well, that filing is due 7 months after the fact, and your due date would be 4/30/2022. So really think about short plan years as a way of reestablishing the renewal date and reestablishing your 5500 due date. That happens so commonly where maybe a wrap is restated or amended to reflect a short plan year and a new ERISA plan year. And perhaps the 5500 due date does not come across as changing, but it certainly does change. So always pay attention to changing a plan year, changing a short plan year. How does that impact when my filing is due? So some key dates to remember. For single employer plans, including controlled groups, the participant count is as of the first day of the plan year, and this is what determines if a filing is required. Remember, there has to be at least 100 employee-only participants on the first day of the plan year. If there's 99 on January 1st, you have a calendar year. If there's 99 on January 1st and 100 on January 2nd, that filing is still not required to be filed, right? We're looking for 100 on day one. Now, what's important about the last day of the plan year? Well, that determines when it's going to be due. Remember, we want to look at 7 months after when that plan year or that coverage period ended. That tells us when the filing is due. So remember, whenever looking at it, remember your first day for plan participants, last day for due dates, and if there's any short plan year, how does that due date move? So I think I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Candace Jones, and she'll continue the conversation on who must file, and she'll touch base a little bit on the delinquent filing information. Candace?
Okay, thank you, Mary Catherine. Good afternoon, everyone. So now that we've discussed when a filing is required, what's included in it, and which employers have to file, let's talk about who's responsible for making sure that these filings get done. Under ERISA, this responsibility falls completely on the plan administrator. Well, who is that? In most cases, it's the employer or an individual designated by the employer. The plan administrator is most likely not going to be the carriers of the benefits or TPA. And for example, MedCom might draft your wrap document or FSA. We may even administer your FSA. However, we're not your plan administrator, not responsible for filing your 5500, but of course we are here to assist and happy to help with getting those filings completed for you. And so moving on, so far, it doesn't sound too bad, right? We've gone through everything on how the filings are completed, and hopefully you have a better understanding of the process and you're feeling pretty good about assisting your clients. But there's more. We kind of have to get to the scary part. We have to talk about what happens when an employer doesn't file timely or at all. And you may wonder, well, how would the DOL ever know? Well, there are several ways that the DOL might discover violations. The first one we see often, an employer will complete 5,500 filings for several years and then just stop. Maybe there was turnover in the HR department and the new HR members weren't aware of the requirement, or maybe they switched brokers or decided to go without a broker and then the employer forgot about the requirement. We've seen different situations. Either way, if an employer files even just one filing and then stops with no explanation, that's a potential red flag for the DOL. The next point, if an employer has been filing retirement filings with well over 100 participants, but they haven't been filing any welfare plan filings, that's a potential red flag. Thirdly, the DOL could discover a violation doing a random welfare audit. Another possibility is that an employer is undergoing another type of DOL or IRS audit. You have your wage and hour audits, retirement plan or tax audits. And so like the IRS or another agency can say, hey, we think you should take a closer look at this employer because they're breaking rules over here. They might be breaking rules over there as well. So it could be a referral. And lastly, we've all heard of or seen a disgruntled employee. Well, imagine one who knows your deep, dark compliance secrets. Let's just say someone's terminated and they happen to know that you haven't filed 5,500 filings for the past 5 years, that you were required to do so. They might just blow the whistle, or even further, maybe a competitor discovers that an employer hasn't filed 5,500s and they just don't want to mind their own business. They could call another employer out as well. So, well, what would be the consequences for non-compliance? And as you may guess, the answer is penalties. Employers will typically have to pay up for missed filings or late filings. Penalties may be assessed for not filing at all. This is where the DOL discovers that you should have been filing, but you haven't. Also, late filing, which is when you filed, but after the deadline or extended deadline. And lastly, an incomplete or deficient filing, which is when you file, but you didn't put enough effort, put forth enough effort from the DOL's perspective. Maybe you didn't include all of the schedules that you should have, or you didn't include all of the information that you should have included on the schedules or on the Form 5500. And there's no statute of limitations. So if an employer has been required to file since, let's say, 1988, and they haven't, technically the DOL could enforce penalties back to that date when they were first required to file. I can't say that for sure they would go all the way back to that date, but it's a possibility. And the penalties can be pretty extensive, up to over $2,200 per day in a worst case scenario, and potential criminal liability. So it's a very serious matter, and very important that employers stay on top of this requirement. So what about your options for those who have failed to file. Well, the first option is to submit a statement of reasonable cause as to why they didn't file. This option is available for non-filers and late filers. However, we typically see this option more often for late filers. Let's say an employer missed their July 31st deadline and they filed on August 3rd. If they have a reasonable cause for why the filing was late, they can submit it upon request from the DOL. If the DOL never contacts them about the late filing, then maybe they never submit the statement and they just move forward. In the statement of reasonable cause, they must show that their failure to file was not due to willful neglect, and there are significant mitigating factors, or the failures arose from events beyond their control. So here are some examples of reasonable cause. These are typical examples. You could probably all understand why these would be reasonable causes. Death of someone close to you, maybe a family member or just anyone else close to you. Jail time, being held hostage in another country, destruction of records, civil disturbance, or receiving bad advice from an IRS agent, which would be a really bad look on the IRS. And I also have a bonus example for a case that I'm currently working on. I actually have a group right now that had a filing due on February 15th, which was an extended due date from their original due date of November 30th. Since the filing fell on a federal holiday, they actually had until the 16th to complete the filing. And actually, that brings up a point. I don't think we mentioned it earlier, but it's important to note that if the due date falls on a weekend or a holiday, the employer will have until the next business day to complete the signature. So say if your filing is due on December 31st, and that falls on a Sunday, and then January 1st is a holiday, you'd have until January 2nd to complete the filing. But I digress. So the group that I'm working with should have signed by Tuesday the 16th. However, they're in Texas in the middle of a snowstorm with widespread power outages. And they planned on getting everything signed on the 15th or the 16th, but due to exigent circumstances beyond their control, they still haven't been able to sign. I'm still trying to reach them, and I understand their situation. So this is a situation where they'll complete the signature as soon as they're able. And in this case, instead of waiting for the DOL to contact them, we're just going to go ahead and submit we're going to attach a statement of reasonable cause to the filing when it's submitted. I actually prefer taking a proactive approach instead of the reactive approach. I just want to go ahead and say, this is the reason why this filing is late. In this situation, as Mary Catherine mentioned, special extensions. I haven't seen that announcement yet. It's highly likely that the DOL will allow special extensions for Texas and other regions who are facing these conditions, but I haven't seen that yet, so I'm going to treat it as needing a statement of reasonable cause for now. And as the last bullet says, it's advisable to retain competent counsel if this option is selected, especially if you have a reasonable cause that you're not sure of. Your reason, you're not sure if it's going to be accepted. So the next option is for employers who are late, but maybe they don't have a reasonable cause. Maybe they just didn't know about the requirement, or they just didn't complete the filings. And of course, if you don't know, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So under the Delinquent Filer Voluntary Compliance Program, the plan administrator, which is usually the employer, acknowledges their failure, agrees to not appeal or dispute the penalty, and voluntarily submits all filings. So the penalties are limited to $10 per day per plan, and there's also an annual cap of $2,000 per plan. So if your filing is due December 31st and you file on January 21st, then your filing is 21 days late, you can multiply that by 10, the penalty is $210. But let's say you file in August, that's over 200 days late. So you're not going to say, oh, it's 220 days late, let's multiply it by 10. No, it's going to be capped at $2,000 for that plan year. But if you discover that you have 5 years of late filings, you're not going to do $2,000 per year. It's going to be capped at $4,000 per plan. So I've seen groups that had over 5 or maybe even 10 late filings, but their penalty is going to only be $4,000 if per plan, assuming it's all under one plan, under a wrap agreement, it's going to be maxed out at that $4,000. So filing under the Delinquent Filer Voluntary Compliance Program will save the employer a lot of money, especially if they have multiple late filings. So we're going to discuss how to handle delinquent filings, some practical matters on handling these filings. So let's say an employer knows they've had over 100 employees enrolled for over a decade, but they haven't completed any 5500s. Well, how far back do they have to go? As far back as they can reasonably determine that a filing may have been due. We understand that new HR may be in place, records may be lost, but the determination must be reasonable. You have to attempt to determine, at which point did we have at least 100 employees enrolled in our plan. Well, what if the plan information cannot be obtained? Well, complete information is required for the most recent 3 years. And then anything beyond that, you have to make a good faith effort to obtain the data. The DOL will accept empty or partial filings. So if you are able to gather the 3 years with all of the data, that's great. And then the other years, gather as much as you can, and we'll submit those filings. Some may be partial, some may be blank, which means we just submit the Form 5500 with no schedule attachments, and the Form 5500 is just the first 3 pages of the filing. So just always keep in mind that if you know you're 10 years late, do the 10 years, and just get as much data as you can. We understand, and the DOL understands, that all of the records might not be available going back so many years. Now, can we consolidate filings retroactively to contain penalties? Yes, and we highly recommend adopting the wrap plan to consolidate the plans under one filing. You can set the original effective date of the wrap to cover the first 5500 that was due. So if you know you're 5 years late and your plan year starts on 1/1, say you missed 5 filings, you can set it back to January 1st of 2016, or whichever year you need it to cover all of your filings. And so that's going to save, again, that's going to save a lot of money instead of you submitting multiple filings under the DFVCP for multiple benefits. And when you do multiple benefits, you would be paying $4,000 max per benefit, as opposed to $4,000 max per plan. So definitely get a wrap document and cover all of your filings. And when the filings are completed, so you submit the payment to the DOL. You shouldn't submit the payment before the filings have been accepted. So you need to have your filings prepared, submit it, and accept it, and then you can submit payment. And that payment can be made by mailing a certified check or by using the DOL's online penalty calculator. We highly recommend paying online. It's just it's a pretty simple process. There's a few questions you have to answer, and it will direct you to pay.gov, and you can make the payment online to the DOL. And then lastly, you can check an employer's records. Brokers can check records. It's all public records, so anybody can check it. You can go on efast.dol.gov. I recommend entering the employer's tax ID. There are other options. You can enter a plan name, you can enter a plan sponsor name, but I recommend entering the employer tax ID. And once you enter that tax ID, all of the retirement filings and welfare filings associated with that tax ID will appear. So you can go through and see if any employers, which filings, I think that the records only go back so far on that website, but you can go and check and see if they've completed filings over the past several years. And you can open the filings up, look at the filings, save the filings. And so that's a very helpful website so that you can keep track of your client's past records, and they can keep track of it as well. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I'm going to turn things back over to Casey, and we're going to accept questions. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Candace. Thank you, Mary Catherine. This is a wealth of information, all incredibly critical, important things. And it's a lot. And you guys, I'm so thankful for you guys to be here today to be able to explain it. We do have a couple of questions that have come in to the questions panel, but I will tell you now's the time. If you have any questions that have come up, go ahead and submit those, and I'll get to that in just one moment. While we're waiting for some other questions to come in, I do want to talk about the other solutions that MedCom Benefit Solutions offers. We do offer ACA employer reporting and penalty appeal support. We have a full book of offerings for employee benefit administration. We do COBRA premium billing administration, as well as consumer-driven health plan. So your FSAs, HRAs, HSAs, independent care packages, we also offer that. We also provide HIPAA privacy and security training for your clients, employers, employees, actuarial solutions, and a plethora of health and welfare compliance solutions for your clients and businesses. Also, if you have any questions that are not addressed from this webinar today, or if you have any other questions about your own clients, 5500's, reporting, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to Candace or Mary Catherine. Their contact information is here on the screen, or you can email medcomcompliance@medcombenefits.com. So we want to go ahead and get to those questions now. One of the first ones that came in was pretty early in the presentation, Mary Catherine, when you were talking about self-funded groups. This says more and more small groups are going with self-funded medical plans. Mary Catherine, can you elaborate a little bit more on the requirements for self-funded groups?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So really, the way to think of it when we're talking about 5500's and the purpose of behind them is that we are reporting insurance contract information, right? So when a plan is self-insured, unless assets are held in a trust, a self-insured policy would not be considered an insurance contract. Their insurance benefits from the employer to their employee group, and would not necessarily be reportable on a Schedule A. So there are cases in which an ASO may provide you a Schedule A, and that's fine. The scenario in which that comes to mind mostly would be perhaps a stop loss coverage. But what I would say on that is that for self-insured benefits to be included on a 5500, we would simply include a welfare code and indicate that the funding for this benefit would be through the general assets of the plan sponsor, and that would satisfy the requirements there. There's from the IRS, there was technical release 1992-01, and in there it included and referenced technical release 88-1, and essentially the purposes of that notice was to just make it clear that when a certain welfare plan, meaning a self-sponsored, a self-funded welfare plan, had fewer than 100 or more participants, or even exceeded 100 participants, the very nature of it being an uninsured benefit precluded it from requiring a Schedule A or C to be provided. So I hope that clears up any questions on that subject matter.
Thank you, Mary Catherine. I appreciate that. And if, if anybody has any further questions about that, or, if there is still some confusion, I know that Mary Catherine and Candace are both open to you guys reaching out. Feel free to email them or contact them outside of this webinar as well. After we conclude today, I will be sending out, as I said before, the recording, the slide deck, which will have their contact information. As well as the link that was mentioned. Someone has requested that we show that link again. I did put it in the answered questions section. However, we will email that out, so you will have access to that link after this webinar is over. We have another question that's come in. Says, why would anyone pay separate penalties for late filings rather than having a retroactive wrap document prepared?
That's an excellent point. And, when we prepare wrap documents for our clients, one of the questions we always ask is, when was this plan first effective? What's the initial effective date of this consolidated plan? And while we cannot backdate, let's say, a restatement date or the document effective date, we can indicate the initial effective date of a plan. And one could say that there was always the intent on the part of this employer to file a consolidated plan, that this wrap document and this plan has been in place since, let's say, 2017. And this is the most current version of that document, and this is the document that we have on file. And for some reason, I can't locate the wrap document versions from 2017 through now, but we have a consolidated plan, and here it is. That is one way to go. Candace might have more to say on that, but certainly the wrap document can come in and save the day in that scenario, in which you would have the opportunity to file on a consolidated manner. Now, where would that not come into play? If a group has previously filed separate filings and perhaps in a year where they had to file medical, dental, and life, and they skipped over one of them, that one missed filing would have to be filed separately. You would not be able to put it into a wrap document or anything along those lines, but certainly there would be room to have an initial effective date on a wrap document with a current restatement date. Candace, do you have another perspective on that?
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, that's a good question. And often, we highly encourage employers to consolidate everything. Like Mary Catherine said, if there happened to be a filing that was missed, like somewhere in the middle of filings, if they filed in 2017 and then missed 2018 and filed in 2019, if all of those filings had been individual filings, yes, you're going to do the missed filing. It's going to be individual as well. But other than that, the only thing I can think of, I don't think it's a great idea. I think you should consolidate all of your filings. One reason I could think of an employer might say, no, we just want to file these separately, and we're just going to pay separate fees. We just really don't want a wrap document because we don't want to have to include all of the other benefits in the filing. We don't have to want to reach out and get schedules for all of these other benefits that don't have 100 employees enrolled. So only our life benefit and our disability benefit have 100 enrolled. We're going to file those separately. We're going to pay the 2 separate fees. That way we don't have to request medical, dental, vision, and other things that didn't have 100 enrolled. So that's one reason. I think I've actually heard that before from one client, but we still do recommend, it's like, wrap them all together, request the schedules, and, pay less money. But, that doesn't work for everybody.
Absolutely. I think that makes sense. And I really, again, want to say this information has been very thorough and appreciate it so much. We haven't had any other questions come in. So I want to thank everyone for taking this time out of your busy schedule to join join us for this webinar, and as always, putting your trust into MedCom to deliver the most up-to-date and factual information to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all crossing our T's and dotting our I's. Thank you again to Mary, Catherine, and Candace for joining me today. And we will be sending out a copy of this presentation, the recording, the links, and the contact information as soon as possible. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week. Thank you.